Hi. In December, the three of us shared this workshop with the Research on Women in Education Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association in a virtual two-day conference. We are now recording it to provide it to a wider audience. First, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Ceal Craig. I'm a fellow of Society of Women Engineers and a member since my college days. I had a career in high tech and aerospace as an engineer and senior director. In my later years, I earned a PhD in education exploring the influences of robotics programs on young women's career decisions. Jill?
I'm Jill Tietjen, author, international speaker, and electrical engineer. I spent my career in the electric utility industry. Today, I write women into history and advocate for women worldwide. I am a fellow life member of the Society of Women Engineers and served as the 1991-1992 president. Debra.
Hi, my name is Debra Kimberling. I'm an aerospace engineer with 35 years of experience in industry, academia, and government. I am a SWE Fellow and a life member who has worked to advance engineering in the community, in particular parent and educator programs. Back to you, Ceal.
Okay. So we're talking about the histories of women engineers need to be told. And that was our general thesis in the RWE conference. So to begin with, let's see. Debra was one of our panelists conceived of the SWE Legends project. The idea grew out of a larger project involving tech legends in San Diego, driven by the San Diego County Engineering Council. She was struck by the lightness and lack of detail for the women legends. Wikipedia was a common source, and she noticed there too a lack of detail on technical accomplishments, more commonly focusing on family and relationships. Seemed to be a media gender bias. For example, 2013 New York Times obituary of Yvonne Brill, who was the 1986 SWE Achievement Award recipient, the original citation proudly proclaimed she made a mean beef stroganoff, followed her husband from job to job, and took 8 years off from work to raise three children. Upon public protest, the New York Times republished her obituary. The new opening citation was NASA rocket and jet propulsion engineer known for inventing fuel-efficient rocket thrusters and presented with the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. Debra was inspired and began driving a project within the late career and retiree affinity group of SWE to change this landscape, focusing first on a SWE Achievement Award recipients. It is the top SWE award and was its first award beginning in 1952. A group of volunteers began editing, writing, and improving all the Wikipedia pages for them. She grew this project and shared it with the larger SWE community at conferences. Why is this kind of project important, the book series in particular? Well, having role models and stories about successful women who were engineers and scientists can and do inspire young people. It can help sustain those pursuing STEM careers. These impacts have been borne out in much research. The book's origin dates to WE24, the annual SWE conference in 2024, just over a year ago, held in Chicago, building on the Legends project as described. Jill Tietjen, the series editor for the Springer Women in Engineering and Science series, was always on the lookout for ideas, editors, and authors for the next book in this series. She had been suggesting that I do one on women in robotics for some time, having just left an awards event where the latest Achievement Award recipient had spoken. Inspired, I ran into Jill and suggested we should take the Legends project to book form. Within 2 days, we had a team, brainstormed over dinner with other members of the LCR, Late Career and Retiree Affinity Group, and 6 of us, all SWE Fellows, started meeting a week or so after the conference in November of 24, recruiting 3 other authors eventually to help. We put together a proposal for the publisher, laid out a plan and schedule, met mostly weekly, and here we are 13 or so months later with the book. From the beginning, writing a book about 75 women from 1952 was daunting. We proposed 3 books, 25 recipients in each one, broken up into 5-year segments. We decided to add setting the stage segments to help readers understand what life was like in those periods. So I'm going to ask Debra and Jill a question, and I need to open up the mind map as we get going, but I'll do that later. So Debra, share with us what prompted you to start the Legends project in 2022.
Thank you, Ceal. As Ceal mentioned, my journey into the Engineering Legends project began with my local San Diego County Engineering Council. We started writing short 70-word citations about pioneering engineering from various disciplines to help make them more visible as engineers and role models in the community. To make sure our library was diverse, we also included the SWE Achievement Award recipients. It's SWE's highest technical award. We thought it would be a good fit. A SWE volunteer wrote the citations. However, I noticed that the citations about the women were noticeably different from the men. For the men, we had the straightforward path to learn about their accomplishments in engineering and their careers. But for the women, the write-ups were more about their first woman status, the first woman to attend a university, to manage a group, or to be an engineer at the company. Sadly, Wikipedia was missing their basic career achievements. Wikipedia even has a page dedicated to this phenomena for the linguistic gender bias. To summarize, women in the media are generally referred to based on their status with other women or in relation to their families. This gender bias discovery forced me to go back into Wikipedia. I needed to review what was written about these SWE Achievement Award recipients. I then did a baseline study on the first 7. In summary, 4 out of the 7 in Wikipedia had profiles. 3 were completely missing. Out of the 4, only 1 addressed their career achievements. The other 3 bios simply addressed their first woman status. To me, this was a proof of concept. We absolutely needed to fix their Wikipedia profiles. In 2022, I presented the findings to the SWE Late Career and Retiree Affinity group. We established the SWE Legends work group with the goal to provide that increased visibility for these early SWE pioneers. I shared the findings in a presentation called Out of Focus, Revealing Women's Achievements at the SWE 2023 conference, and set out to start recruiting volunteers. Ceal was one of those early volunteers who stepped up to write Wikipedia profiles. Jill also came up to me during one of our annual fellows meetings and volunteered to be a part of the advisory team to help accomplish our goals. That same year, we approached the SWE archivist, Troy Eller English, at Wayne State University with our ambitious Wikipedia goals. She gladly started compiling the profiles of the Achievement Award recipients, scanning the paper archives on the first dozen, and we began our journey into becoming Wikipedia editors. Thank you, Ceal.
Okay, thank you so much, Debra. Appreciate it. So Jill, one of the other parts of this was being part of the Springer series, and you are the series editor. Could you share your work and goals as that series editor for Springer?
Absolutely, Ceal. Thank you. In February of 2014, I received an email from an editor at Springer named Tiffany. At that point, I'd never heard of Springer. I'm an engineer in the electric utility industry. Tiffany had seen an article I had written on integrating renewable energy into the U.S. energy grid. She asked me in the email if I wanted to write a book for Springer on distributed energy and would I be willing to have a conversation. I replied that I would be willing to have a conversation. Tiffany and I had that conversation. I told her I was not interested in writing an ebook on distributed energy. However, in 2000, I had self-published a book on the history of women in engineering, and I wanted to update it and have it published by Springer. Would that be of interest to her? She said she would check. In October of 2014, Tiffany sent me an email. She said, "You don't remember me, but I would like to have a follow-up conversation." I absolutely remember Tiffany, and we had a conversation. She said, "Here's what Springer would like to do. They would like to start a Women in Engineering and Science series. Volumes to be published within the series could feature any topic within the broad umbrella of science and engineering. Volume editors would be women. Chapter authors would be women. Volumes could be written by individual women or groups of women. I would be the series editor. My primary job would be to recruit volume editors with a goal of having 3 volumes published each year. And my History of Women in Engineering volume would be the foundational volume in the series." The deal was sealed. First, I started updating and writing my History of Women in Engineering. And then I started recruiting volume editors. The Society of Women Engineers was one of my primary recruiting venues, but I contacted almost everyone in my network, including my sister, who served as volume editor for an early volume in the series on sustainable agriculture and food biotechnology. Other of the earlier volumes were on aerospace materials, water quality, and industrial and systems engineering. As of today, about 30 volumes have been published in the series, and I am a relentless recruiter of volume editors. Book topics have included archaeology, microelectronics, nanotechnology, 3D printing, soft computing, computational intelligence, AI and sustainability, biopharma, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, power, renewable energy, and climate change, to name some examples. About 10 volumes are in the pipeline. A lovely story has happened in the past year. A woman who the 3 of us know through SWE alerted one of our colleagues last fall that due to the installation of a new president at her university, the institution at which she was in the process of applying for a promotion had decided that every faculty member had to publish a book in order to get promoted. I could help. I provided her with the book proposal format and other related information. She put together a proposal. I submitted it through the proper channels, got her book concept approved for the Springer Women in Engineering and Science series, and she whipped a book into shape. I got a photo of her and her book just before we presented this panel at the RWE conference. She has met this requirement for her promotion because of the Springer Women in Engineering and Science series. My goal is to provide women with the opportunity to be published and to demonstrate that women can do science. The bios in the book provide role modeling pieces so that girls and boys, men and women, can understand that women do science and engineering excellently and that their contributions to our standard of living and quality of life are important. Women and people of color are mostly invisible through history. Their contributions usurped, minimalized, and marginalized. I write women into history. I'm incredibly proud of the Springer Women in Engineering and Science series and of the book that we are talking about today. Back to you, Ceal.
Great. I'm going to pause this a second while I pull up the mind map. Okay. Is that just the screen sharing pausing? Yeah. Debra, could you pause the recording? All right. Thanks for your patience while I opened up the mind map. So when we started getting together in November of 24, a group of 6, we started brainstorming using this mind mapping technique that I've used for a lot of things. And so we looked at, we took sort of a bird's eye view. We said, well, this is interesting. What should we have in it? What should be in the preface? What should be the chapter outlines? What are the key elements we wanted to have in it? We talked about content info, what it would look like. Looked at style, writing style, all these things, okay? And then we looked at sort of extras. Well, maybe we should do some sidebars, or how do we show the early work before the first award, which we added a chapter for. Then we talked about a goal when we needed it ready, and what we needed to do to have that be published. Okay, that was our kind of bird's eye view of the whole project. We then went and started talking about permissions. Well, we would get stuff from the SWE archives, from the SWE organization, talked about using our own words, not prior work. And then Jill made a list of permissions. Photos and graphics, we started talking about, gee, what would be in there? And out of that grew this different one that we added to the first volume, which was a 2-page spread in each of the setting the stage chapters, which I'll mention, that talked about what would be in there. And we had graphics for all of that. We had to get a graphic artist. We talked about photos and so forth. We had a timeline set up when we would first do the book proposal, when we'd have the title, won't go into all of this, approval, contract review, when would we have our first chapters, what was our best case, worst case, when was the book review, when it would be ready for publishing. We talked about peer reviewing and so forth. So that was our timeline. We said, well, should we get supportive comments, which we ended up doing for the forwards, where we would store things. You have to talk about, wow, we're in 5 different states or 6 different states, or no, Debra and I are in the same state. So 5 different states. Where would we keep this and how would we maintain it? How would we do references? We started grabbing references along the way. We often brainstormed ones and different ones, different parts for our setting the stage. Then we started fleshing out more of the setting the stage dialogues. How do we get this information? Out of this, we decided to ask the SWE Fellows for input in a survey, which Holly organized. We had some oral histories. We talked about the growth over the years and so forth. Then we kept track of our meetings and when we attended, what our contact information was. And then this is the book content. And this is where we really spent, more of our time as we went forward. And so we talked about the preface, who would write it, what the introduction chapter would look like, and so forth. And then the 1952 to 56, we listed the 5. And for each one, we talked about who was doing it, when it was due, and so forth. So I won't go through all of those. And then the afterword, we added as we went along, and why we wanted to talk about it. And we learned about what our years were and when we'd each graduated. And from me to the youngest, there's a 15-year difference. Talked about the graphics. So this was how we kept track of things. And then we started talking about the next books as well. All right. I'm going to close that and go back to this. So that's kind of the book origin story in some ways in our process to deliver the first book. So now let us give you 3 examples of biographies within the book. And they're representative samples from all the other chapters of the other 25 women that were in this. And I'm going to go through Maria Telkes, Deborah's going to talk about Rebecca Sparling, and Jill's going to talk about Admiral Grace Murray Hepper. Okay? All right. So when Debra first approached the LCR AG about the nascent Legends project back a number of years ago, I wanted to help and use my research skills. And Dr. Telkes, who had received the Achievement Award in 1952, meant something to me as that was my birth year. So her Wikipedia page was more extensive than others, and she'd had a lot of media attention during her career. And also the SWE archives had a large trove of articles, stories, often in her own words, and made writing this chapter easy. I was struck by the amount of patents and devices she had developed or been part of, all to do with solar power. We think of solar power as a new invention, but in our aughts and the teens of 2000, but in reality it's not a new invention. Commercializing it has taken longer than expected, I posit, and the availability of cheap oil and gas provided no economic incentives for alternative power development. Dr. Telkes, Maria Telkes, is a woman of the 20th century. She was born when it began and dying at its end. Personable and inventive, she was born in Hungary and moved to the United States after earning a PhD in physical chemistry. During World War II, she developed a solar still to convert salt water into fresh water for sailors who were downed at sea. Then she helped build several solar-powered homes and low-cost solar-powered ovens, ultimately earning 27 patents. She was the first recipient of the SWE Achievement Award in 1952, and she received additional awards. She left a mark on the world and inspires all with her accomplishments and passion for helping the world by providing renewable energy products and concepts that harness the sun's energy. Dr. Talkas enjoyed her work in science and engineering more than anything else. She continued to invent and consult into her 80s, a role model for us all. Next, Debra will talk about another book chapter, Achievement Award recipient from 1957.
Thank you, Ceal. Rebecca Sparling was the 1957 SWE Achievement Award recipient. She was one of those SWE legends whose online profiles was virtually non-existent, and she is absolutely the perfect example of why I started the SWE Legends project in the first place. Who was Rebecca Sparling? Well, first and foremost, she was a fellow of the American Society of Materials and a fellow of the Society of Women Engineers. To help put this in context, a fellow is an honorary title that reflects the highest membership grade of any engineering or technical society, and it also reflects their engagement in those societies. She wrote the seminal industry textbook, the materials handbook that was used by both students and industry for several years. But it is a slightly odd thing that her name is not mentioned anywhere as the author of that textbook, not even once. And so that kind of brings the question of what was life like being an engineer at a time when women comprised less than 1% of the engineering workforce. Throughout her career, in all of the interviews and speeches that we've recorded, Sparling spoke glowingly about her work and employers. That's the way it should be. But it was 9 years after her retirement that one journalist captured the nature of what it was like to work in those years. Starting with her college degrees, Sparling wanted a degree in materials engineering. But there was a slight scandal in the fact that there was a mandatory 3-week off-campus field surveying requirement for all engineers. And to avoid that compromise, she decided to major in chemistry, and she used chemistry as her backdoor to enter an engineering career. Sparling's early career was through a series of manufacturing, foundry, and automobile plants as a metallurgist and consultant. She changed jobs frequently. She left her first company realizing that she would never be treated as anything other than an executive secretary. She found work in the Great Depression, but it was difficult by definition. In one interview, a man flatly rejected her, stating, "I have a daughter your age that doesn't have enough common sense to come out of the rain." To which Sparling said, "I know a man about your age who is in an insane asylum, but I don't consider you to be insane." She got the job, proving the age-old concept that humor can win allies even in biased times. When Sparling answered the call for women to serve during World War II, she applied. But they would only give her administrative roles, even though she had 10 years of engineering experience. It took her months of lobbying before she was able to get switched over to an engineering position. What did Sparling accomplish during her career? Well, Sparling was a pioneer and leader in the aerospace industry. She had the extreme good fortune to enter the aerospace industry in its formative years. She worked with the likes of Mr. Jack Northrop, an early founding president of Northrop Grumman. She managed the Northrop Materials Lab as the chief metallurgist and later a staff engineer. She switched over to General Dynamics, where she pioneered the field of immersed ultrasonic inspection, commonly used on gas turbine parts and in the aerospace industry. She was a design specialist, writing the very first papers on non-destructive testing, representing her company on industry and government boards. But in her retirement, Sparling became even more visible as a role model and environmental activist. She formed the Desert Conservation Environmental Association to counter the installation of a coal plant in the Mojave Desert proposed by Edison. She helped drive tighter emissions regulations to protect the desert in which she lived. Sparling was constantly in the news. She testified before government boards addressing the press. She was on television. She was in front of the general public on environmental issues. In summary, Rebecca Sparling was the aerospace engineer and role model I wish I had known when I was growing up in high school. Thank you, Ceal.
Jill.
The 1964 SWE Achievement Award recipient was Admiral Grace Murray Hopper, the woman I credit as the catalyst for the work that I do to nominate women for awards and write women into history. In 1988, I was elected to the SWE National Board of Directors. At my first meeting, the president held up the nomination forms for the National Medal of Science and the National Medal of Technology and asked for volunteers to submit nominations. I had never heard of these awards before, presented by the President of the United States. 17 women were in that room, and no one raised her hand, so I did. The first year, the women I nominated were not of the right caliber. But through the work I had been doing to research historical and contemporary science and engineering women to enable an outreach program, a Great Women in Engineering and Science essay contest for sixth graders in Colorado and Wyoming, I realized that if I did a good enough job on her nomination, that Admiral Hopper would receive the National Medal of Technology. I worked on that nomination for 2 years. I contacted Admiral Hopper. She indicated she wasn't going to help me. I contacted individuals who had helped found the computer industry. I contacted the Secretary of the Navy, the former Secretary of the Navy, senators, computer industry historians, anyone I could find who would help me. And just before I assumed the office of president of the Society of Women Engineers, I learned that Admiral Hopper would get the medal. Of course, I couldn't tell anybody because you can't upstage the President of the United States. Admiral Hopper asked me to receive the medal on her behalf. She was very frail and unable to attend. I accepted her medal and attended the ceremony on the hottest day of my whole life at the White House Rose Garden in September of 1991. Admiral Hopper died shortly thereafter, on January 1st, 1992. As I looked around me and saw all the recipients for the National Medals of Science and the National Medals of Technology, I said to myself, where are the women? I now knew about the historical and contemporary scientific and engineering women. I had been actively researching them since 1987. Admiral Hopper was the first individual woman to receive the National Medal of Technology. How was that possible? And so my mission began. Admiral Hopper was my first successful nomination to the National Women's Hall of Fame. That was in 1994, and her family asked me to accept that medal. That was my first trip to Seneca Falls, New York, the birthplace of women's rights and the home of the Hall. I have now nominated about 40 women successfully to the Hall. I served on their board from 2009 to 2014 and as CEO in 2015. And in 1996, on the coldest day of my whole life, I was at the launching of the destroyer Hopper, nicknamed Amazing Grace, named for Admiral Grace Murray Hopper, at the Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. Who was Admiral Hopper? She was a mathematician and physicist who invented the computer compiler, the software that enables humans to use human languages, English, French, German, Chinese, Japanese, Swahili, to communicate with a computer instead of mathematical symbols. She was instrumental in the development of the computer language COBOL, and she loved to take credit for finding the first computer bug. It was a moth stuck in the relay of the computer she was working on at Harvard during World War II. She removed the moth with her tweezers and compact mirror and taped it into the logbook. You can see it today at the Smithsonian Institution. Admiral Hopper was a born teacher and communicator. She loved to say it was easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission, as you can always find someone who will tell you no. She carried around with her pieces of wire that were 11.86 inches long, the distance that light travels in a nanosecond, to demonstrate the speed of computers. Everyone called those pieces of wire Admiral Hopper's nanoseconds. For the press release announcing her National Medal of Technology, she gave me instructions. Make sure that it says, if you ask me what accomplishment I'm most proud of, the answer would be all the young people I've trained over the years. That's more important than writing the first compiler. When you use your smartphone or your laptop, remember it was a woman, Admiral Hopper, who helped make it possible. Back to you, Ceal.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill. So, why is it important to talk about notable women legends? Why do we have this passion, the three of us and others, to communicate and investigate and research and share this information? Well, it's important, in particular for young people who are just starting out in their career, young women, to see role models. And so by sharing women's accomplishments, showcasing their legacies, it inspires them. So one of the things we had recommended in the presentation we made for the RWESIG in that conference was you could take this beyond what we've done. What about a series on women in higher education, or just women in education, and then it could be higher education, elementary, and so forth, administration. Notable women educators, maybe STEM educators, maybe a focus on that. Another one we had in mind was Legendary Women of Color series. So again, we were speaking to an education audience, and so those were some of the ideas we came there. You could expand this into other realms as well. So how did we do it? Well, how do we suggest you do it? Form groups that have a connection and interest, make lists of notable women, create or edit Wikipedia pages, Debra's initial idea that we've worked on. Go further, create a group of biographies like we did, or just spread the word in discussions or keynotes or talks that you have about notable women. Those were some of the recommendations we had made. So we have an email address. I'll leave that up just for a second before I move to the next slide, to say that if you had any ideas for our future Legends books or anything else on the Legends project, you could write that, which is SWE Legends books, excuse me, at gmail.com. And then we asked for questions, and we did have some in the conference. And the last thing we'd want to leave you with is, this is a mention of the book itself, which is out there. Shipping, you can get it digitally as well. There's a book discount, and it shows what the topic's about, where the link is, and you can use this code to get a 20% discount until the end of March, this calendar year 2026. So with that, I believe, oh, and then we have references. Researchers have to show references. It's very important. So these are all the references that we use that were pertinent to the data that we shared and today. And that's it.